So welcome everyone. So great to see such a crowd turning out to see Sharon speak tonight and to hear what she has to say. I want to share just a little story about why she's here tonight. Sharon is someone who, through my training in yoga and meditation, I have found her teachings to be a fundamental practice. And I found it to be helpful in so many ways, and so many aspects of my life as a nurse and a mother and a partner and a friend. And a couple months ago, she did an online teaching, a 7-day teaching on intention. Broke intention down into 7 different aspects, and we've been sharing those through the yoga classes and the emails over the past fall session of yoga. And the first teaching is on the aspiration of your intention. And she tells a story of, one of her teachers challenging her, is your aspiration big enough? And I thought about what everyone here has been doing to build a yoga program at Rockefeller. And in order to learn about and engage with the community even more, spearheading some research efforts here. And I thought, well, the bigger aspiration would be to have Sharon come. So I emailed her, and she said yes. And just to put it into perspective, there's a retreat coming up in the spring, and it's a 7-day retreat to sit with Sharon and some other teachers. And I'm 205 on the wait list, and Rachel's like 228, and I'm sure we're actually at the front end of the wait list. So it's just really a special thing to have Sharon here, and we hope, and our intention is that tonight can be, just a wonderful evening for everyone, and can be, part of our community efforts to, offer this kind of program here at Rockefeller. So without further ado.
Hello. Is that too loud? You okay? All right. Well, thank you for the invitation. I don't often get uptown this far. Or the east side. It's a really big adventure. It's great. And it's just great. What a beautiful room and program, and seeing all of you is really a tremendous thing. So now that you've reminded me of that online course, I'll maybe just talk about aspiration and then move to intention. How many of you, by the way, would consider yourself new to meditation practice? So, okay, great. I'll throw some of that in too. And we'll have a chance to do a little bit of practice together here at any rate and have some questions. So, the idea of aspiration within the context of, say, the Buddhist tradition or Eastern traditions is really this sense of having a theme for one's life. It's not like I aspire to have a bigger apartment, or something like that. It's something that is long-lasting, that manifests in a lot of different situations. Even a lot of people might say, I aspire to have a lot of money, but nobody actually wants a pile of green bills in their living room, We want what money represents to us: security, safety, maybe leisure time or adventure. And then the question is, what are the perhaps many ways we can have more safety, security, leisure time, adventure? And so it's usually for most of us not a question of damping down our aspirations, it's usually a question of expanding it and broadening it and making it something more comprehensive for our lives. I started out the course by telling these two stories, which I often tell. The first is about the retreat center I co-founded in Barre, Massachusetts. I just met someone at Thanksgiving from another Barre somewhere, and we were like so happy because nobody knows how to pronounce it. It's spelled B-A-R-R-E, everyone says bar. But it's Barre, Mass. And my friends, Joseph Goldstein and Jack Cornfield and I had been kind of wandering around the East Coast looking for a retreat center. This was 1975, 1976. And we actually moved in Valentine's Day 1976, and somebody suggested we go to Barre, Mass. and look at this property, which was at the time a Catholic novitiate. And the country was in the midst of what we were quaintly calling the gas crisis. So these really big properties, very hard to heat, maybe not so many novices. And so the Catholic Church was selling a lot of property. And we went and looked at it, and we were quite torn about what to do. On the one hand, it seemed absolutely perfect. It's very quiet, it's very pretty, not much happening in Barre. It seemed like the perfect place for a retreat center, but this is the end of 1975, and on the other hand, it just seemed enormous. It was so big, it sleeps about 100 people, plus office space and kitchen and dining, the whole thing. And we just said to one another, who knows how many people in this country will want to learn how to meditate, or this form of meditation. And we couldn't decide what to do, so we went to downtown Barre for lunch, which is a very classical New England town with a town green on it. And in those days, there was a monument on the town green which had the Barre town motto, which is tranquil and alert. So we took a look at that and we said, okay, that's an omen. Any town that has a motto like tranquil and alert should have a meditation center. Because when we talk about the many techniques or methods of meditation, they're all aimed toward deepening tranquility and calm and peace and strengthening energy and aliveness and interest. It's not like taking a nap only. It's not just that one side, it's both. So we talk about both endlessly. We talk about ways to try to bring them into balance over and over again. So we bought it. And I still, it still amuses me because the monument's gone, but we have, I think, 2 police cars and has, tranquil and alert on the door. And these friends of mine got married in the town of Barre, and the marriage certificate is stamped as tranquil and alert. So that was a good blessing for a wedding. And it also turns out that the building we bought had been built in stages. The main part, the central part of the building, had been built as a private home. As a private home, it was built by this man named Colonel Gaston, who at one point was Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, and it turned out he had a personal motto that he tried to live by, which was, you should live every day so you can look any damn man in the eye and tell him to go to hell. So I read that, and I thought, well, I wonder how well he got along with his neighbors, who presumably were going around trying to be tranquil and alert. But I like to tell those 2 stories in juxtaposition, because I think really for most of us, we have a kind of motto, we have a theme that tells us what we're capable of, what we deserve in life, what's going to make life meaningful, what's going to make us happy. And sometimes that really is constricted, it's really limited through the force of just conditioning. And so part of what we want to do is expand it, open it up. Maybe we really can be happy. And our happiness is like fuel for being able to care for others, you know, rather than something that's just like selfish or self-indulgent. So that's the first part. And then the part that's about intention is more like the daily or even moment-to-moment manifestation of what we really care about. You know, when you're about to have a conversation with somebody, this is something I like to do if I'm going into an organization or a business to teach. I suggest, like, before a major conversation on the phone or in person, just kind of ask yourself, what do I really want to see the most come out of this encounter? Do I want to be seen as right? Do I want a resolution? Do I want to be helpful? Do I want to grind them into dust? It could be anything, right? But hopefully it will connect to our strongest aspiration. Because that's how we make it real. That's how we bring it to life. It's just moment to moment to moment. Which brings me to meditation practice. It's not so obviously for everybody, but certainly for me, it has been the way that I have learned to take values that I hold very strongly and move them from a more abstract level to seeing what I can make real at different times in different situations. And so it's a whole other grid in a way of assessing or understanding our action. You know, you may not be able to help somebody, but you can treat them with respect, if that's part of your worldview, that everybody is worthy of being treated with respect. Something like that. So even though, of course, it's frustrating and disappointing not to be able to solve their problem or help them directly, still we have made real what we genuinely care about the most in our life. And that begins with really knowing what we're feeling and being able to let go of those things that are damaging, or we've been down that road a lot before, it didn't help anything. And be able to enhance and support and really savor the qualities that are onward leading, that help us in some way to be able to actualize what we care about. So when I talk about meditation, I usually talk about it as a skills training. That's why I learned it. And that's what I believe in. It's available to anybody. It's not really tied to a belief system or even a certain worldview. It's about learning certain skills. And the first of those skills is concentration. Most of us would describe ourselves as fairly scattered or distracted. Maybe not in every arena of life, but at least in some. And you don't have to be an experienced meditator to know that. You know, you sit down to think something through, and it's not long before you're gone. And our minds are just all over the place. They say that very commonly our attention goes to the past, and especially to some situation where we now have some regret. And we go over it, and over it, and over it, and over it. Not with an eye to making amends or for lessons learned. We just go over it, and over it, and over it, and over it. And our attention jumps to the future. And we create a scenario that has not happened, and may never happen. And we're filled with anxiety about that. Do you know how many times I wondered if I needed boots? Because there was going to be like 8 inches of snow today. You know? My favorite example of that is probably, I was teaching with a friend, Bob Thurman, who's a recently retired professor of Buddhist studies at Columbia, and I just used this example. It just came to me. Like I said, let's say you're sitting in an airplane on a New York City tarmac, some airport, and you start thinking, I wonder if this plane's going to be late. late. Oh, I bet it's going to be late. How late is it going to be? It's going to be incredibly late. Oh no, it's going to be so late, I'm going to miss my connection. What's that going to mean? That's going to mean I'm going to land in Portland, Oregon, and it's going to be after midnight. It's not New York. I won't be able to get a cab. What's going to happen to me? As though Portland was famous for people like disappearing, if they landed after midnight. And I said as an aside that I have a kind of saying that I use myself when my mind begins that kind of arc of anxiety, which is something will happen. Like something will happen. There'll be a bus. You'll spend the night at the airport. The plane's not even late yet. You can't work it out right now. The reason I said I was teaching with Bob is because maybe 6 weeks after the class, I got an email from him which simply said, "Lands in Portland, lots of cabs." But our minds, it's bad enough, truly terrible things do happen in life. But in addition, our minds create, all this stuff, and then we carry the burden of it. So that's just habit. Our minds tend to jump to the past, jump to the future. It's a huge amount of life energy that's lost to us. And so the first kind of principle of meditation practice is gathering. It's gathering the attention, gathering the energy, learning how to settle, learning how to center. So that's the force of concentration. And the second great skill is mindfulness, which is like the word of the hour. I just was in Buffalo a month and a half ago, I think, Buffalo, New York, which is where I went to college. And it was through an independent study program in Buffalo that I ended up going to India because I had a really fervent desire to learn how to meditate. And I looked around. This was, a long time ago. This was before there was yoga everywhere, or universities were offering, programs like that. And I heard about this independent study program and I applied, and I created a project. Said I want to go to India and study meditation. They accepted it, so off I went. So I went back for the first time in 40 years or something, just the other week. And I went back because they were having the first ever mindfulness festival. And it was such a hoot for me, and I kept thinking, and I said, if you had one of these all those years ago, I wouldn't have gone to India, I would have had to. So mindfulness feels somehow like it's everywhere. And it means many different things, the word, but classically it means a quality of awareness where our perception of what's happening is not so distorted by bias. Like old fears, or a very common example would be, you feel pain in your body, you feel heartache, you feel disappointment. And right away we start projecting it into the future, like what's it going to feel like tomorrow? What's it going to feel like next week? What's it going to feel like next year? So we're not just experiencing something as it is, we've added all that anticipation. Or we feel it's not permissible to feel a certain thing. And so we start to block it, or calling it something else, or something happens. So that the way we are perceiving what's happening is somehow distorted. So, actually one example I use a lot is I was teaching with my friend Joseph somewhere, and he and I were just in the kitchen having a cup of tea, and somebody came into the kitchen in some distress and said to him, I just had this really terrible experience. And Joseph said, well, what happened? And he said, I felt all this tension in my jaw, and I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am, and I always have been, and I always will be. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And he said, yes, and I've never been able to get close to people, it's never going to change. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And it was really interesting for me watching him go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Joseph said something like, why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's like genuinely painful, authentically so to feel that pain in your jaw, but now you've added, I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. So one of the ways we talk about mindfulness is it's a skills training and learning how not to be so involved in all those add-ons. They may come up for sure, but we learn how to relinquish them and return to our actual experience. And that's why mindfulness is said to be the greatest doorway to insight or understanding. It's definitely about inhabiting our lives, not always multitasking and not kind of missing our experience because we're just somewhere else. But it's also about understanding our lives. We're taught so many things, so many myths, so many ideas, and we get the chance to actually look directly. Oh, is vengefulness that satisfying? The 3 millionth time I've gone through that scenario? Maybe not. Is compassion or love that weak and stupid, really? As I've been taught. One of my favorite sayings to take apart is, it's a dog-eat-dog world. I've had people say to me, well, dogs don't eat dogs. I've had other people say, well, dogs actually kind of do eat dogs. That I can't answer. But what a really grotesque saying, And many of us have been brought up that way, don't help anybody else because they're not going to help you. And, it doesn't matter who you have to step on to get ahead, then you'll be safe, right? And yet, is that how things actually are? Is that a road to happiness? So, I was co-teaching once this 6-day seminar, and the first night I used that example, and this young woman raised her hand, and she basically said, you just ruined my life, because I never knew the saying was, it's a dog-eat-dog world. I always thought it was a dog-eat-dog world. Like puppies jumping up and down the meadows, It was a horrible saying. And then the last day, the last morning, she went up to the microphone and she said, I've decided I refuse to live in a dog-eat-dog world. I'm going to live in a dog-eat-dog world. And we get to decide that for ourselves because we can see clearly, is that really bringing me happiness? Or is that really as sentimental and gooey as I've been taught? Because we're looking with some clarity and some openness in our experience. So mindfulness ultimately leads to wisdom or understanding. And the third great skill is compassion, which could be looked at in different ways. Certainly in meditation, it has a lot to do with self-compassion. Being able to, feel the pain of having not fulfilled something or made a mistake or whatever it is, but having some resilience and understanding everyone blows it. This is a part of the human condition. And maybe lessons learned, the things I could improve on, the things I could be better at. But that's different than that sort of endless self-castigation, like I'm so terrible, I'm so bad, I'm so miserable, I'm so awful. So the example, it's a little bit of a joke, but since we're going to meditate just a few minutes, it's not that uncommon. The joke is this is how many people respond. When we practice together, certainly as we're going to do, is a kind of foundational technique. We choose an object of awareness. We rest our attention on that object, and we find our attention has wandered, we let go and we bring it back. And we just do that over and over again. We let go and we come back, and we let go and we come back. But this, let's say that object, that central object, is the feeling of the breath, which is a very common technique. What's a common scenario in a meditator's mind? You feel a few breaths, you're very mindful, and then you start thinking. And then you realize that you've left the breath, and you just get down on yourself. I can't believe I'm thinking. No one else in the room is thinking. They're all sitting here in bliss. They're all sitting here, they're probably enlightened, they're very, very close. I want to be like them. They're so great, I'm so terrible. And they're sitting here bathed in brilliant white light, or I forget, there's some light people get, I forget the color, but they have light. I don't have light. All I have is thoughts. I'm so stupid. I'm so bad. Maybe they are thinking, but they're thinking beautiful thoughts. They're thinking spiritual thoughts. I'm the only one who's thinking about, this stupid thing again and again and again and again. Right, so we come out of that. First of all, maybe we've extended the period of the distraction a good long time. And it's so demoralizing, it's so exhausting. We don't have the energy to kind of pick up and say, okay, blew it, starting over. Right, which is what we're looking for. That's the healing. And that's the empowerment, is being able to come back. So we can translate that into any arena of life. It seems, and this is a common kind of misunderstanding, that self-compassion, being kinder to oneself, is like being lazy and losing all standards of excellence and saying, what the hell, I made a mistake, doesn't matter. I'll forgive myself, I can make another one in 10 seconds, it doesn't matter. But it actually is being proven not the case. That it's actually a source of tremendous strength, not of weakness. And people say, people tell me, friends of mine who are scientists, which I'm not, that performance studies of all kinds are showing that the kind of harsh, punitive response to blowing it in some way, making a mistake, will spike your performance, but briefly, and then you crash. And that self-compassion is proving to be maybe the best way to have a sustained effort toward learning something, or making a change, or making progress in something. So that's part of the development of self-compassion. In meditation, it manifests in just that way. Settle your attention on the feeling of the breath. Lo and behold, it's not 800 breaths before your mind wanders. It's 1 or 2. You're off somewhere, you realize that. With some kindness toward yourself, you practice letting go and coming back. It's the most effective way to actually practice. And then certainly there's compassion toward others. But as with many of these states, it's really powerful to explore them. Like, what does it mean and what does it not mean? And what about what we've been taught? Does that hold true? And so on. So I'm told that if you Google compassion, Google will send you suggestions, because they think that's what you must be searching for, because so many others have searched for that very thing. So if you type in compassion, you'll get compassion fatigue, because so many people have been searching for that very thing. So, and that's very understandable, given how, burnout is so prevalent, and the sense of overwhelm and suffering is really seems inexhaustible, and so on. But there's a way of understanding compassion that has, first of all, it's a balance between compassion for ourselves and compassion for others. And it's a joining of compassion, which is, let's call it caring, with wisdom, which means understanding limits. Right? Like, with a friend, I will do everything I can to try to help you and ease your situation, and realize I'm not in charge of the universe. That's just not the way life is. Which doesn't actually lead to resignation or apathy. It leads to balance and the ability to sustain an effort. Because I think if any of us look at those times, we feel just overwhelmed and demoralized, and we feel we just need to withdraw. It's not from a lack of compassion, really, or caring. It's something else. It's some kind of joining with compassion, with a recognition that, okay, life is the way that it is. I will do everything and it's also the case that we do so many things in an effort to make things better, and we don't know right away how things are going. So I was just in Florida, which I was also talking about. I taught a number of things, including a day-long retreat with his friend John Kabat-Zinn, who, those of you who know the world of mindfulness, especially mindfulness-based stress reduction, know that he's an enormous figure in that world, that he really is the first person in this country that brought the tools and the techniques of mindfulness and meditation into the lab and into science, and really it's almost like a translation effort to take, he completely relanguaged things into stress reduction and things like that, and had the research done on his methodology, to see where it might go and so on. So it's enormously impactful. He told the story. First I spoke about how I got into meditation in Buffalo and all that. And he spoke, and he was so interesting. He said he was at MIT as a student, and he walked by some room, and there was a sign saying, Philip Kapleau-Roshi will lecture on Zen. And he said he has no idea why, but he walked in. And he sat down, and he heard the lecture. And he said there were maybe 5 people in the room, including Philip Kapleau, and the faculty liaison, and maybe 3 students. And then when I was leaving that day, and someone was driving me to where I was staying, I said, can you imagine being Philip Kapleau and walking out of that room thinking, damn, what a wasted evening. There were only 3 students there, I should have just not done it, it was like nothing. And one of them was John Kabat-Zinn, whose life he changed and who really changed the world. And I thought, how many times is it like that? Where we think this is negligible or this amounted to nothing, but we're really planting seeds because of our caring and our efforts. And then who knows where things will go. So it's about compassion and caring plus perspective, or plus wisdom. That's really our endeavor, and that's one of the skills that we do develop. So why don't we sit together for about 5 minutes. I'll guide you through it. You can just sit as comfortably as you can. Close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. See if you can find the place where your breath is strongest for you or clearest for you. Maybe that's at the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. And unlike in some yogic traditions, we're going to be paying attention just to the normal, natural breath, not trying to make it deeper or different. So you find that place where the breath is clearest for you. Bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. And if you like, you can use a quiet mental notation like in, out, or rising, falling to help support the awareness of the breath, but very quiet. So your attention is really going to feeling the breath, one breath at a time. And if images or sounds or sensations, emotions should arise, but they're not very strong, If you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. If something comes up and it is strong, it pulls you away, you get lost in thought, or spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. We say the most important moment is the next moment after you've been gone. When we have the chance to let go, and we have the chance to begin again. Just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Okay. So I'm wondering if you have any questions about anything you experienced or anything I said. We don't have a microphone for you, so we can need you to speak really pretty loudly if you do. Or do you have any questions? Ask me one.
Well, my question would have to do with, aspiration and having a large aspiration, but then connecting it to, the things you need to do every day to reach that aspiration. And how do you keep those things connected? And then how do you use a meditative practice to help facilitate that connection and awareness?
Could you hear that? Well, a large aspiration also, which is good, tends to be kind of general. Like I want to be truly happy, or I want to bring love into every situation, or at least I want it as part of a conversation, not necessarily verbally. But but it's part of the environment of any encounter, something like that. And then, it is a question of being very mindful of what we're feeling, what we're fearing, ways we're using our energy, choices we're making. So for example, this is not exactly connected to aspiration, but it could be. So I have a friend who describes herself as someone who had a terrible time ever saying no. And so what she did in her meditation was she sat down one day and she purposely brought up those kinds of scenarios where she was asked something and ended up saying yes, much to her regret. And she learned the feeling in her body, this kind of visceral panic that was coming up or whatever. And that became her feedback system. So when she was then at work or somewhere and she was asked that very kind of question and she felt that very thing, that was her signal to say, I'll have to get back to you. She couldn't bring herself to say no, but once she bought some time, she could. So we hardly even know what we're feeling a lot of the time. We're so busy, we're in such a rush, we can be so disconnected. And my favorite example is probably you're really kind of peeved and you don't even know it, and you go off to the computer and you type out the email and you press send. And then maybe 2 hours later you go, whoops, I think I said that with some hostility. Maybe I'm not that likely to get what I want. And in the olden days of email, just such a cute thing to be able to say, if you were using AOL, which I was and still am, frankly, and the recipient of your angry, hostile email was also on AOL, there was this magic feature called unsend, where somehow something in your computer reached out to theirs and pulled it back because I hadn't read it yet. So I once unsent an email to somebody who wasn't nasty and hostile, but I thought better of it. And she wrote to me right away and she said, the weirdest thing just happened. I was looking at my screen and there was an email from you and it just disappeared. And I wrote back and I said, how strange. But life doesn't give us that many unsend buttons, to know what we're feeling as we're feeling it, to know what we're thinking as we're thinking it. And then we have choice. Maybe my favorite definition of mindfulness actually came from a New York Times article long time ago now, many years ago, which is about one of the first pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the classroom. This was a 4th grade classroom in Oakland. So they asked one of the kids, who's like, let's say 9 or 10 years old in 4th grade, what is mindfulness? And he said, mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means. And I thought that is a perfect definition of mindfulness. Because what does it imply? It implies you're really in touch with yourself. You're starting to feel angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after it's built and built and built. And it also implies a certain balanced relationship to that anger. If you just get completely uncentered and overwhelmed by all the different feelings that come, you're likely to hit a lot of people in the mouth. But at the same time, if you hate what you're feeling and you're ashamed of it, and you're trying to deny it, and you're trying to repress it, you just get tighter and tighter and tighter until you explode. So we sometimes call mindfulness that place in the middle where we can fully recognize what's happening, but there's some space. And in that space, there's room for creativity, there's room for options. Maybe you think, someone in the mouth last week didn't work out that well. Maybe I'll try this instead. And so everything we practice in a formal sense, if we're sitting, is useful in that way. And, so you have this aspiration, you have a vision for your life, you have a sense of what might make you actually happier. And then you have the moment when somebody says something to you that's ridiculous, and you have your reaction. If you have some space, you can choose, how am I going to respond to this?
Anyone else? I think we have time for one more question.
So do you do this every day, every morning, whenever?
Yeah. There are two aspects, and then we can take your question. We'll just hurry up. There are two aspects usually that I talked about. One is like a formal dedicated period. Maybe it's sitting, maybe it's walking meditation, but in that period, your goal or your intention is just to deepen these qualities, these skills. And that ideally is every day. Usually, it doesn't take that long. Like I've had neuroscientists say to me that something like 7 to 9 minutes a day will actually change your brain. But it's like the everydayness of it. And it doesn't have to be in the morning. In a lot of yogic traditions, they'd say in the morning is the best. But really, I think what is the best is whenever you're going to get to do it. Like I have students, not in New York, who drive, to work. And they say they meditate, they get there early, they sit in the parking lot in the car. That's the time they can actually do it. For some people it's the morning, some people it's the last thing at night, but something like, let's say 10 minutes a day, if you want to pad it a little bit. The other part is what is sometimes called short moments many times. That was a phrase I heard from this great Tibetan Lama high up in the Himalayas. It means like short moments many times. Like the most famous example is probably from Thich Nhat Hanh, this Vietnamese Zen teacher, who said, don't answer your phone on the first ring, let it ring 3 times and breathe. Then you pick it up. So the phone ringing is the signal. That just reminds us, you know what, good to take a breath. Or before a meeting, or before a phone call, just take a few breaths. Some people have said to me, they've gotten into the habit of writing out the email, and before they press send, they take a few breaths, and they read it again. See if they want to send it. Or, not to always be multitasking, not to be drinking a cup of tea while you're checking your email, while you're on the conference call. Sometimes just drink a cup of tea. It's not going to last so long that it's a big disruptor to, your whole day. But that's the way to actually taste the tea and experience that fully. So, just short moments many times. But honestly, I feel, for me, that wouldn't happen if I didn't have a formal practice every day. It would be like a nice idea. But then it's asking yourself to be present in the most pressured, the most harried, the most complex time of your day, like at work or something. Without the daily sitting is like muscle strength, It's like strengthening every day, and then it's there. Okay. Yeah, did you have a question?
Maybe that answered my
Okay.
question. So that was good, but I was just wondering, in this age of sort of instant gratification, this is just constant, are you finding that schools and prisons and other hospitals are more open now to meditation?
Oh, yeah.
You're finding in general?
Totally. In a way that, I find astonishing and amusing. I have a Google alert on the word mindfulness. Somebody suggested I do that the way you can put a Google alert on like a movie star or a politician or something, and every time there's some media, you can get it. So I get tons of things every day about mindfulness. I think, really? That's amazing. It's really kind of amazing. And it is in all of those places, not everywhere, not every school or every prison, but it's in a lot of those places. The expressions of it might be very different. Like I was in Florida, and one of the people I was talking to was a school teacher, and she said, we use mindfulness with kids so that if a kid says something like, I can't do that, you can remind them to say, well, I can't do that yet. So like, I can't do that, and they teach mindfulness to the kids so that they realize, oh, I just closed a door that doesn't have to be closed, and whatever kid language is appropriate. So it's really growing. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to take a moment to thank Sundardas, who was playing the flute during the yoga practice. And Erica Mather, our guest yoga teacher. And the yoga teaching assistants, Roshana and Maria. And Rachel Hammerman, who is working behind the scenes. So thanks, everyone.